You're in the Business Insurance Zone with me, Steve Savant, national insurance columnist and financial color commentator. And today on our show, we're talking about income scenarios with life insurance from our Competition Desk series with Brandon Roberts, founder of the Insurance Pro blog.
When it comes to life insurance, annuities, long-term care, disability, or group pension plans, we're the news you can use.
Well, welcome everyone to the Business Insurance Zone. I'm your host, Steve Savant, and we're broadcasting live to a nationwide audience of financial professionals right here in Fountain Hills, Arizona, home of America's largest fountain. And with me, day 4, Brandon Roberts. Welcome to our show, Brandon.
Good to be here.
Hey, a little shock and awe last Tuesday and Wednesday. If you haven't seen those shows, you need to hop out to the site, www.brokersalliance.com. Everything we're talking about is competition desk issues, and I mean these are items of contention. So we need to really clean that up, and today we're talking about contention. We're talking about life insurance as an income scenario, as an alternative or a supplemental income for retirement. When we talk about this, I just want to go back in the day. Back in the 90s, we did current assumption UL, and the rates were double digit. We were doing alternative investments for this, and we all know where the interest rates went, and on top of it, they were pricey. The chassis were clunky, very expensive, not very consumer driven. Then in the year 2000, we all went equity crazy in the VUL market, and we know what happened there. Now we're going with the #1 product in the United States right now, indexed UL, which by the way, I actually love. And if it's done right, it's golden. But we have some issues that we want to talk about today and make sure we really get to it. First of all, we talked a little bit about dividends yesterday because we felt that whole life wasn't getting their due.
Right.
And if we're going to talk about 20 and 30 year look backs, we want to make sure people saw, hey, dividends really actually technically outperformed the Monte Carlo tranche series on S&P. So we want to be fair. But today we're talking about the look back. And we're talking about how we use it during the accumulation period and how we use it during the distribution period. Let's talk a little bit about when we talk about S&P not scoring in a year, what happens to that policy during the accumulation years? I didn't get an S&P crediting. What really happened?
You didn't get a crediting.
And then what happens to my policy, though I still have expenses to pay?
Correct. There's still expenses involved.
So here's my problem with this, because we're walking out telling people that you don't have any problem, there's no crediting rate, you didn't lose anything that year, but we still said, oh, we had bills to pay. And most of the illustrations and proposals that we see are not maximizing the cash. They're buying way too much death benefit, the wrong option. And so my expense loads, for example, S&P 500 in years 2001, 2002, 2003, and 2008, 4 of the last 10 years that we've been tracking have had loser years. Now, thankfully, we didn't have any negative. We just didn't get credited anything. But I still had bills to pay. Most of the contracts that I've seen and reviewed in in-force ledgers were running between 340 and 400. It should never even be close to this. 350 to 400 basis points. And I must say, that's 4% loss in 2001, 2, and 3 compounded.
Right.
Talk a little bit about this. I think this is a problem.
Well, first off, when we're designing these things, we really have to understand that it's not about death benefit per se. It's not our primary goal. If we're going to use this product and use it for its real maximized benefit, we need to keep that thing as low as possible, need to decrease expenses as much as possible so that we can fill it with as much cash. Now, there's going to be years where we may not get credited interest, and yeah, that costs us some money, but it's really no different than a mutual fund that loses in a year, and you still have to pay the fees on that as well.
Oh, by the way, just a little side note. I just, with clients in January, they said, Steve, I just got my mutual fund report, because I'm a registered rep, I see things. He says, I just got my mutual fund report. My report says that I took a loss. I said, yeah, it was a tough sign. I remember who chose the fund, you did, so the onus is on the client. But here was the bigger issue. A week later, he gets a 1099 on capital gains, and he says, how can I have a capital gain tax on funds like this? And every year, I've been in this thing 30 years, every year it's the same thing. The consumers don't get that. Most of our insurance guys certainly don't get it, especially if you're not FINRA licensed. Right. But my clients are sitting there going, I had expense charges on my mutual fund. I had the SAI report, the Statement of Additional Information. If I was in a qualified plan, I had to pay those fees too.
Right.
But if I was in a non-qualified plan, I'm even subject possibly to capital gains in a loser year. So when I look at all expenses all in, that's one thing. But when I see insurance, and we should know better, we've been in this thing for a long time. So when we're doing supplemental income and we're trying to suppress the death benefit as low as we can according to the regs, we are trying to minimize expense loads. And in those years that I pointed out, especially those 3 in a row, 2001, 2, and 3, we had nothing credited to our contracts. But I am looking at illustrations and in-force ledgers at 400% or 400 basis points or 4% compounded losses for 3 straight years. And nobody's talking about the expense loads. That's what bothers me. That's what I see.
And it's going to happen. It's not the magic bullet. It's not all things to all people. It's not the path to absolute prosperity. It's one plan. It's one trick that you can use, that you can employ, and there's some risk involved. There's a potential better reward to it, but there's some risk involved, and loss is there.
Well, now when you say that, though, I never hear everybody keep using that word. There's risk. Are you talking about expense load risk? Or are you talking about something different than that?
We're talking about a little bit of principal risk, because the money's there, and if there is no credit and you have to pay expenses, that's what you're risking.
And by the way, those expenses are priced at current company practice.
Right.
They could be higher, right? I mean, there's some contractual issues that say yes, in a really terrible economy, we might have to actually charge more COIs. We might have to up our price practice on our premium front-end loads. I mean, there's a lot of things like that are strange. I mean, that come into play. So when we talk about preservation of principle, and believe you me, I love IUL, but I think full disclosure, caveats, making the right disclaimers are the way to go, and make sure that our clients understand that before we start signing them up for issues like you'll never lose any money. That statement, it gets us in a lot of trouble. Well, you remember, you can contact me at thebiz@brokersalliance.com or call 1-800-290-7226. We're happy to answer any of your questions. When we come back, we'll be more with Brandon Roberts on all these income scenarios with life insurance.
You're listening to the insurance industry's #1 resource for products, planning ideas, carrier information, and interviews you can use. When it comes to life insurance, annuities, long-term care, disability, or group pension plans, we're the news you can use.
Companies in our business are always touting service, products, and underwriting. And we do that too. But here's the difference. Now enter the world of the elite producer with a value package that cuts us out of the pack. A BD that approves social media marketing of non-FINRA products and doesn't take an override. With the best competition desk in the industry, and for our loyal producers, a true group health plan. No one offers that. Brokers Alliance does.
Well, welcome back to the Business Insurance Zone. I'm your host, Steve Savant. And of course with me, Brandon Roberts, one of the top life insurance bloggers and extraordinary product expert in the United States. And I gotta say, I've been in this thing 30 years. Brandon is one of the sharpest, and especially representing the next generation. And I really appreciate knowing that I have people that are coming on, the next generation, sharp as a tack. We've had Cheryl Moore on this show, under 40. We've had Bobby Samuelson here, under 40. Brandon, under 40. All these young minds are coming on in our industry, and they know the historicity, the things that we actually live, they have studied. So I really appreciate you being on the show, because you really bring a whole nother tenor to the argument. And before we get into the distribution of all the things we want to talk about on income, I pulled this piece from one of our carriers, and I have to say, this might be the coolest piece I've seen in a long time. It actually ranks the historical point-to-point, 1 year to 1 year, on 2 20-year periods or 20-year tranches using the Monte Carlo theory. And I noticed that at the base, there's 100% probability that you will get over any one of those 2 20-year periods 5.5%. Now, that surprised me. I noticed that the S&P chart that everybody's floating around is somewhere around 585. I'm pretty certain that includes dividends.
Right.
So I really can't use that chart. I think this is much more to my liking. But I also noticed that when you start showing 8%, and remember, how many illustrations do we see this way?
We see it all the time.
All the time. The probability of that occurring is 60%. Now, it's still good, but it's 60%. Right. So if I'm showing, and there's a couple carriers that actually have lookbacks at 9.1 right now. According to the Monte Carlo theory, it's only 11.6% chance that that'll actually occur. So I think I'm going to be conservative, and I'm going to drop down to the 5.5. So I always show the look back just because we're in competition. But I'm going to show what I think is more reality, which is the 5.5. What's your thinking on that?
The theory that I've always gone with, and the thing that I've explained to agents and to consumers, every time I show them IUL is, listen, we can look at the historical look back, and that'll look really, really nice, but let's go with something in the 5.5 to 6% range, and here's why. We have these numbers. We know that there's a very high probability that it's going to work out that way. And so I would much rather assume 5.5 or 6% and end up with 8 than I would assume 8 and end up with 5.5 or 6%. I can always take that little bit of extra and say, hooray. But if I go the other way, I'm in a whole lot of trouble.
Well, when I think about our design features, really, when we built, because IUL is on the same chassis as current assumption, VUL, guarantee, I mean, this is all on UL chassis. When I look at that, this product was built to be about 200 basis points over whatever the carrier's current interest rate crediting is. Right. So if your carrier right now is at 4, 4.25, I really don't want to go any higher than 6.25, really, because that's how it was designed. And so when I like to quote, if I get my druthers on this, I like to quote all three. Here's the 20 and 30-year look back, because if I don't do it, the competition's going to clean my clock for not bringing it up. But then I also like to show, and here's my design number, like in my example, 6.25. Then I like to show the historical number of the Monte Carlo 20-year tranche theory at 5.5. I show that to the client and try to give them some solace, some basic idea of what we're trying to say. When I'm thinking about this, when you look at this, how many of the contracts do you see anybody going as low as we're talking about? I mean, the vast majority.
Right, I don't see it a lot. And you know, it comes down to, I don't go as far as you do. I typically go out and say, here's 5.
You don't go as far as I do.
There you go. I go out and say, here's 5.5, here's 6%. And by the way, I'm not going to show you distributions at 8%. I mean, you can see the money, you can see the accumulation, but that's really, if it's better, then we know the math here, the money's going to go up. And there's been plenty of people who said, yeah, but I have this illustration from this person, and look at it. And I said, okay, well, all right, fine. That one says 8.2%. So we'll go back, we'll run it at 8.2%, and look, we blew it out of the water.
And that's what I mean by I don't want to really show those numbers,
right,
the look back, but I feel like I'm forced to all the time because we're in a competitive environment. And if I get to write any kind of small executive summary brief to my agent that he can sit in front of the client, especially when we get into bigger cases. When you get into 162, when we're talking about corporate insurance, and I get to talk to any CFO, anybody that has any kind of intelligence on basic financial understanding, they're going to really appreciate the numbers that we're showing at the lower end and know that everything else we're showing could be fantasy. Now, listen, I'm happy that it would turn out. I mean, this year, the contract that I looked at a couple days ago, its anniversary is right now in August. Oh my goodness, the S&P has done great. And on life insurance, especially when you have high-end caps 12 all the way up to the leading 17%, that's been a great year from August to August.
Right.
But I'm looking at trying to show some real good resolution here on, and I guess what I'm saying is in the accumulation period, we're all showing the 20 and 30 year. But what happens when I have negative years during distribution?
Again, we don't get credited.
We don't get credited. So when I take my loan out, because I still need my money. So I may have to pay someone, we're going to get into all this tomorrow on all about policy loans. It's going to be, in my view, kind of a bloodbath. We're going to have to take no prisoner's viewpoint on this. I'm looking at distributions that are at the highest quote of the 30-year look back with no negative years, with unbelievable rates of return, comparing those rates of return with qualified plans, mutual fund equities, limited partnerships. I think we're going to get ourselves in huge trouble here, and I just can't believe we're going down this road. Tomorrow when we talk about it, this will probably be the biggest show you'll see all this week, although I think they've all been interesting. This show tomorrow on policy loans. We're going to talk about the good, the bad, the fixed, the variable, contractual guarantees, as well as current company practice. All of this matters. You want to make sure you're doing your designs right. And of course, the way we do our designs, we're always doing it for compliance sake and for trying to bring some history to it. Remember, you can watch all our shows at www.brokersalliance.com. That's the Buzz on the Biz for today. Get in the zone, the business insurance zone.
The Biz is brought to you by Brokers Alliance, a national leader in insurance products, support services, and educational workshops. When it comes to life insurance, annuities, long-term care, disability, or group pension plans, we're the news you can use.